Hey there, it's Christian from 7 Gaming Network, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny deck tech this time. So I am sat at my computer, and as you can see, we're having a look at Tabletop Simulator for us to go through this. Now, I'm a big Sith fan. Okay, I love all things dark side when it comes to Star Wars, and so I wanted to set out to make a Sith deck that includes all those classic elements that we think of when we think about the Sith. So yes, there are elements of theme for this, but I also wanted this deck to be competitive. I wanted it to be something that I could use in tournaments, and something that really would challenge those real top tier decks. So I wanted a deck that's going to feel like in tournament parlance we would say like a tier 2 deck, a good tier 2 deck. If I can regularly challenge some of the top decks in the meta, give them a good run for their money, plus I could also tech for my meta, and we'll certainly talk about some meta tech cards in this potential build, then that's what I'm aiming for. And so this is what I come up with. So I present to you, this is Vader's Legacy. Now, hopefully with episode 8, Vader's Legacy will be more than just a snotty, stroppy sort of teenage Sith that we saw in episode 7. But by the by, what we have is Kylo Ren, and of course we have Darth Vader himself. So why these characters? Why have I specifically chosen these ones? Well, quite apart from that, I quite like the theme, and the theme's quite nice. When I think of Sith, I want characters that are going to feel like they have the power, that they have some control, and when I mean power as well, I don't mean just the control aspects. I also mean able to put out some really good damage, and that is what we have here in these character dice. So Kylo Ren has 3 damage sides. Now, admittedly, one of them we're paying for, and one of them can be slightly hit and miss. But one thing I will say is the more I've played with him, the more I've played with his ability, the better it's getting consistently. There are more decks that are more able to cleverly gather their resources and play out some big expensive cards. So in my testing with Kylo, that special, it really is averaging 2 damage. Okay, sometimes it whiffs, but yeah, sometimes it's hitting for 3 or 4. And all in all, it really balances out. You can check out my tacticas for both of these characters as well, and I'll talk about that whole thing a little bit more in those videos. So we got solid damage output on Kylo Ren, but of course we've got monster output with Darth Vader with his 2 and 3. But what we're doing with these 2 characters is we're not just having this good solid melee damage. And I'll also point out, of course, that they are all black sides. Like, this is damage that's going to resolve, apart from that 2 for 1 with Kylo. But as you can get a sneak peek over on the right hand side of the screen there, we're actually using a battlefield, the Rebel War Room, that's really going to help us with that particular problem with Kylo. With a 2 character deck, of course, it's a little bit easier for us to capture this battlefield and make sure that we get those paid for resource sides off. Now, the reason I've gone with Darth Vader, and remember this is only going to be 1 die of Darth Vader and 2 dice of Kylo Ren. Now, the reason I've gone with that is Vader's ability is bonkers good. It's really, really strong. And one of the things that I find with this deck is we want to get to the late game. And the big problem that we have with a 2 character list, which admittedly is quite a lot of health for a 2 character list at 24, mostly because Vader's got so much, and Kylo, nothing to sniff at with 11. One of the things that I find is just keeping your characters alive. If you can keep both of these characters alive, then as you'll see, the cards we've got in the deck will really massively benefit from having the 2 characters around. So early game, mitigation of damage is really important. And Vader's very good for that with his discard. If your opponent's got less cards in hand, it's harder for them to discard to re-roll and maximise their damage. And actually, he's got a 2 disrupt side. And if you roll Vader early in your turn, maybe you're going first and you roll him out first, we're always happy with seeing the 2 or the 3. We love damage out of Vader. But if we see that 2 disrupt side, our opponent is in that really awkward place. They have to spend those resources. Great, if they do so, well, we've got stuff that we can change to get our damage out of it. But if they don't, we can really punish them by taking their resources. And there are other resource control disrupt cards that we see in this deck that is surprisingly strong. This deck has a multitude of ways to play. It's actually one of the harder things about it. This is not a beginner's deck. This isn't an easy deck to play with. But boy, has it got lots of tools. Okay, so there's our characters. So we've got good damage. We've got sides that we're all happy to see. The final thing I want to say about characters, actually, though, is that we are looking at two characters that do have a shield result on. And as I just said, we want to stay alive. This deck wrecks late game once we've managed to get some upgrades out. And what I see is, whilst we want to get the damage out, or we want to get maybe those disrupts out, if we're left with shield dice at the end of a round and we're resolving those, we're certainly not unhappy. And there may be some instances where you're actually quite keen to see the shields and get those shields out and defend your characters. So those are our characters. We talked about our Rebel War Room. Keep that in mind as we're looking at these other cards, because the next set of cards that we're going to look at, here's our upgrades. So this is where some real damage comes into the deck now. Kylo Ren's lightsaber is it's off the scale good. It's a brilliant card. 4 damage sides, and they're all sides that we can pretty regularly get off. Our modified sides, that's fairly easy with the 2 character dice that we are running. It's a little more difficult if our opponent is removing Vader's die, and then we've really only got the one straight up damage side on Kylo left, because of that 2-for-1. So there can be a little bit of balance going on there with it, but Kylo's lightsaber is significant damage very consistently, so we love that. The other thing is, it comes with a shield, and again, if we can keep these characters alive to late game, chances are we're going to be in the ascendancy with the type of upgrades that we see in this deck. Now we also have then Mind Probe. Of course, that's great. Yes, it's expensive, but we are, as a little sneak peek, running Sith Holocron in this deck. So we're confident that we can get a Mind Probe out, and we can get it out for cheap. And when we're looking at the sides on Mind Probe, and the reason why I've decided to still keep 2 in, although a lot of people are dropping to 1 with this, is that in this deck, I'm really happy to see, well, just about any of these sides. Now, if it's early game and we manage to get an early Mind Probe, I mean, we're really happy with any side other than blank, because again, we want to mitigate damage. We want to keep these characters alive to the late game when they get really strong. 2 discard means, again, you're stopping your opponent from being able to maximize their damage output towards you. The 2 disrupt. And you should be really, if you've got a mind probed up character, you should be rolling them probably first, because if you get the special, that's what puts the pressure on your opponent. So if you first turn, first action of the round, roll out Mind Probe and get the 2 disrupt, well, you're happy with that as well, because again, it pressures your opponent into needing to use up those resources. It forces them into a play. And if they don't, you really punish them and will slow their game down massively. And of course, if they do get forced into that and play it out, well, you can re-roll. And we've got re-rolls and we've got focus in this deck, of course. So, Mind Probe, absolutely fantastic. And Lightsaber is, I feel like it's losing a little bit of favour recently. But we can't get away from the fact that redeploy is a really strong ability, and you can strategically tactically place Lightsaber on a character that is being primaried, and that's actually going to work really strongly in our favour, because when that then goes across to the other character, which is probably going to be Vader, most of the time your opponent is going to primary Kylo, well, late game then Vader can really stick the damage out, especially if he's got another lightsaber or a Kylo's lightsaber on him. You can really get crazy damage, and it's always good value, that lightsaber. And of course, it does have 3 damage sides on, which we're happy with. and it's got the shield on. And again, the shield's not the worst thing in the world if we roll that. Now then, moving on to our next set of upgrades. This is more of our control and mitigation, especially here. And I've got to say, the Force villains have really got a fantastic set of cards for doing this with. So Immobilize is great. I talked about shields and how they can be really helpful in this deck, especially in a very aggro-y, damagey meta. You get an early Immobilize. You can either use it to be breaking up those ranged chains where they're trying to link all of those base and modified damage sides, or you can be taking all those lovely shields off the Immobilized dice early on and helping to shield up your characters. So it's a really great double use, that one. Force Throw is a super powerful card, and what I really like about this is that yes, we've got those two specials which control a whole board. They can prevent your opponent from wanting to roll their characters, activate their characters, because they'll be scared of rolling a 2 or a 3 or maybe even more with some of their characters or support dice. And it also, of course, has 2 disrupt sides on, which is great. Again, if you're rolling this character and you want to roll your Force Throw character out early because you want that special on the table, if you roll it, it's great control. It changes your opponent's turn. But if you can get your disrupt out as well, again, that's forcing them really early to, I'm going to have to play my upgrade now. I'm going to have to make my whatever play it is. And they may not want to do that. And that pushing and that threatening is always powerful. So Force Throw is a really powerful ability, and we want to get that in play as soon as we see it. Force Choke is very similar. It's that control of dice, it's blanking out some damage, that it's breaking up ranged chains, and in a meta that also does see quite a lot of shields. I'm playing a lot of decks with Qui-Gon in, or with Han Rey and lots of shields going onto Han. Being able to deal that unblockable damage is really solid. And when you couple that with the lightsaber and Kylo Ren's lightsaber, we've got a few different ways of doing some unblockable damage in the deck, which can be really helpful for pushing through damage in a world of where it seems like every deck at the moment's got dug in. So these are not only ways of doing damage, but primarily there are controlling upgrades. And of course we have the ubiquitous Sith Holocron, which we'd just be very stupid not to be running in a deck like this, which is mono blue, of course. One thing I will say is, whilst the +1 resource is naff, and clearly our blank sides are naff, the focus is really great in this. And focusing Vader to a damage side, or focusing Kylo to his 2-for-1, or that focus is really lovely on there. So don't forget about it when you're using Sith Holocron. Don't think, I haven't rolled my special. That's a waste. That Sith Holocron can really be useful for getting those focuses off. Now, in terms of support, the only support that we're running in the deck is it binds all things, and I would almost mulligan for this. One of the ways in which this deck wins is getting itself to late game. So you need manipulation, and you need a way. I mean, effectively, you want to accelerate to that mid game really quickly, where you have got a couple of upgrades out, and it binds all things. Obviously, helps you to get there. With some of the other cards that you'll see that we've got in here, it can mean that you can get those really early plays of things like your lightsabers onto your characters, which is really helpful. Now then, if we have a look at our events that we're running in this deck, because we've got quite a few, and the events suite is really where we've got lots of potential to play around with it, okay? The ones I think that are absolutely essential to it, I've put these 3 in the middle here. I think these are your 3 big power cards in the deck in terms of events. No Mercy is a finisher. That late game, that card, if you draw it, that's really going to, possibly even mid game if you've managed to get some good upgrades. If you've got a couple of lightsabers out, or you've got a mind control that's really dishing out damage. No Mercy is a finisher and is a fantastic card. So. And I've got that in as a 2 of. Yes, you could have it as a 1 of. You really, really could. But I tend to find that one of the things I really want to do is make sure that when I get to late game, I can then finish a job quickly. As soon as I've got a sort of critical mass of upgrades on my characters. So No Mercy comes in really invaluable as an invaluable option there. The Power of the Force, what a card! And this is another thing why I think manipulation and mitigation early on in the game to keep your characters alive becomes really important. Because if you've got 6 slots available for upgrades, and with Sith Holocrons we can really fill those upgrade slots up pretty quickly, then the Power of the Force and its effectiveness goes through the roof, especially as I frequently end up resolving this for 4 resources. Again, helping me to ramp up, get myself to my mid-game or my end-game quicker with lots and lots of resource available to play a lot of these events that we got, because you can see No Mercy is not cheap, and some of our other events, we want to play quite a few events potentially in the late game. And so if we've been able to get a big Power of the Force off for lots of resources, that's really strong. And obviously, if we can get it off for a dice of 4 or 5 damage, or maybe even 6, well, clearly we're going to take that chance if it presents itself. Now, Force Strike is, of course, a classic pairing with Vader, and we're going to use it to get his die to that 3 damage side when we want to. Yes, it costs. I'll also just point out that it's turn one of your blue dice to a side showing melee damage, so we can turn Vader to his 3. You could of course use it on Kylo at the end of a round, if Vader rolled his 3 to maximise your damage there. And this is then you may resolve that die, so you don't have to. So you can, although you need to be careful, but you can use it to put a character to its melee side, enabling perhaps the modified sides on your lightsabers, something like that. And then you don't need to resolve it until your next action. Just be careful, of course, that your opponent hasn't got some way of manipulating that dice that you just turned to its black side. So let's have a look at some of the other cards that I've got in here. Now, a card I think is really strong is Feel Your Anger. Now, bear in mind that we're playing with a deck that has Immobilize and it has Force Choke. So we have ways of choosing to blank our opponent's dice. So that synergizes very well with Feel Your Anger. But actually I just find Feel Your Anger is generally great if someone rolls 2 blanks in their die pool. That's when I'm going to play it. If they've rolled 1 blank and I can remove something like a Vader die, then that's a strong play as well. But generally, you want to get 2 or more. And if someone gets a really bad roll and you've got that Feel Your Anger hand, it is crushing. It can wipe out a player's turn. That's how a whole round. That's how good it is. So that's one I've got 2 in of that. I think it's an essential part of this deck. Now in Rage, I currently have only 1 copy of this in. I could very happily have 2. The thing that scares me a little bit about it, of course, it is that damage. But that is offset against the fact that we're trying to get to our mid-game pretty quick with this deck. We want these upgrades out. And so as we're running a few 3 and even 4 cost upgrades, then that Enrage, it's so fast. And that's what makes it really good. It is very, very fast. And being able to get 3 resources together the first round and still deal damage if you want to is really strong to be able to get the lightsaber out. Now the other 3 cards I've got at the top here, this is sort of in response to the very shooty meta that we tend to see at the moment. Now you could put a second dodge in. I think it really depends on what your local meta's like or the meta you're playing in regularly. I think the thing with dodge is that it's not necessarily all that great against Django still. Not much is great against Django. He is really difficult to deal with. I think one of the best ways of dealing with Django is to shield up, which is why I've got quite a bit of shields in this deck, and happy to take shield results. But the meta may change, of course. So that's why I've got the 1 dodge in there. It can, again, delete an opponent's turn. It can be a bit like Feel Your Anger. It can really just change, almost make it so that your opponent's just really doing nothing that turn. But it's not cheap, of course, at 2 resources. This is why a Power of the Force or some resources can come in really handy to enable you to play some of these really quite costly events that we have in here. Deflect is of course, brilliant, and we are always happy to see that against a shooty deck. And then Mind Trick. Now, I've put 2 copies of Mind Trick in. Yes, it's expensive. It's thematic, so I love that. But I think the difficulties with the dodges and the deflects is, of course, against, in a mirror match or against another melee deck, they're just straight up discards. And Mind Trick at least allows us to have those 2 options that we can affect whatever type of deck we're playing against with our Mind Trick. It's harder if an opponent is rolling and resolving quite quickly, but if you're playing against someone who really likes to roll out all of their dice and then start doing stuff, wow, Mind Trick. If you can identify that sort of player early on, that's how they're playing their deck, you can get ready with a Mind Trick, and again, that can delete their turn as well and really make a big difference. So these are our main cards. These are our 30 that are in here. Now, a couple of other cards that you absolutely could include in this deck, and I've played around with and ummed a little bit. Force Training, I think, is a really great card. I think it's really excellent. We love the focus on it. We love the +2 melee. We don't mind the 1 shooty. It's a bit awkward in that it could do things like enable, and it's a trap on our opponent, which is a bit rubbish. But ultimately, it's got a really good special on it. We don't mind taking a resource from it. They're all just good sides and a really good special on it. And I'd really recommend getting that in there if you're finding that you've got too many events and you're struggling to play them. You're struggling to deal with your resources. Because of course you're going to end up getting this one for free anyway off the Sith Holocron. Intimidate, again in the meta with lots of shields, which I'm seeing a lot of, is a brilliant card. It says pay 0 to do 3 damage to a character out of hand. Marvellous. I think that's generally going to be a strong card, always going forwards, unless we have a big meta shift away from having shields on characters. Use the Force is fine. I think most of the time you're going to end up using it like another Force Strike with Vader, just a lot slower. However, it can help you to set up for like a big Power of the Force. There are quite a few times I've had the Power of the Force, 4 or 5 upgrades in play, and I haven't rolled a melee damage. Use the Force. Yes, it's a bit slower, but it can enable that then 4 or 5 melee damage to come out from your Power of the Force. Now the next 2 really are, okay, I'll admit, these are not the best cards, but they can be really helpful. Disturbance in the Force is generally against... Blue does struggle with controlling lots of dice. It can do great single die manipulation, immobilize, force choke, use the Force. I mean, there's plenty of ways it can deal with 1 die, but when you've got multiple dice, it becomes much more difficult. And Disturbance in the Force really can be something that it's a last-ditch attempt. It's a bit like Scramble in yellow, but it can work for you. Now, Abandon All Hope is one of these ones that it feels like boom or bust with this card. This is a horrible choice to be presented with. Now, my issue with this is that I think you need to be playing a game where you have built up quite a bit of resources. And I think late game, it can be really marvellous. If you've Power of the Force for a huge number of resources and you've got 3 or 4 sat there, then you start the new round and you're up to 5 or 6 resources. If you can hit and Abandon All Hope early on, and that's not an uncommon thing to happen, by the way, and if with this deck, and if you then Abandon All Hope at the start of an opponent's turn and it's late game and they're desperate for using their cards, all their resources to make their events happen, it's horrible, and it can really upset them. So, as in, I've had a rage quit just because I abandoned all hope someone late game. So that's a card that you really could put in if you're finding you're playing a meta that's got things like lots of Jabba crime lord type decks, or maybe the Akbar hired guns deck, that wants a lot of resources, wants to make a lot of resources and put big stuff in. Abandon All Hope is a really good meta include in that meta. So that's Vader's Legacy for you. It's not a cheap deck. We've got a few legendaries in here, but ultimately this is a deck I'm having a lot of fun playing. A lot of fun playing, and well, and I hope you do too. As ever, if you've got comments or ideas or anything like that you want to throw into the mix, please do add them on the bottom of the video. And until the next time I see you on the next video, keep playing Destiny.